Hello everyone and welcome to this live Q&A session as part of Cambridge's virtual Postgraduate Open Days. Today we're going to be focusing on the programmes at the Architecture Department at Cambridge. We're just going to wait a few minutes so that everyone can join, and then we'll get started. Thank you. Okay, I think we're coming through loud and clear on the live stream, so let's get going. Welcome everyone to this Q&A session for architecture. My name's Sam. I'm from the international team at the Cambridge Admissions Office. We've got about 40 minutes or so for this afternoon's session, so we'll aim to get through as many of your questions as possible. But I'm delighted to be joined by two panelists this afternoon. I'll hand over to them to introduce themselves. So James, if you'd like to go first. Thank you.
Hello, my name's James Campbell. I'm the current head of the architecture department.
Hi, my name is Natcha. I'm a PhD student in the department. Before the PhD, I did the MAUS program, MPhil in Architecture and Urban Studies as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks both very much for being with me this afternoon. Just a quick reminder that if you have any questions live, then you can submit those by going to the bottom of the live stream video. There is a link there under about this session, and that will take you through to the question page. I'll be monitoring that, and I can pass those questions on to our panelists later on. But James, I believe we're going to start with just a short presentation. Thank you.
Hello. So I'm just going to tell you about the architecture department in Cambridge. So why would you want to study in Cambridge? Well, I think we can safely say we're one of the leading architecture schools, certainly in the country, if not the world. Cambridge University has amazing facilities, and as part of the university, we share those. We have our own extraordinary library here, which is ideal for graduate study. We also have professional programs, so we have a brand new digital fabrication workshop. We have labs and spaces for building things, and we have studios so that all students doing design courses also have access to they have their own desk, and we have study spaces for the PhDs. And if you come here, you'll be taught by the leading experts in the fields we have. So we'll come to that in a minute. So we have a whole raft of courses. We're a very small faculty in general, which is nice. We have a nice friendly atmosphere. There's a picture of our library here, for instance, which is a small friendly library. We have access to the enormous university library which has got millions of books, but we have our own personal library for the department, which has 40,000 architecture books and journals. And the courses we run are listed on the left. So we have and I'll run through them very briefly, the Master of Architecture course, which is and the MST Apprenticeship, which are our two professional architecture degrees, graduate degrees. Then there's the MST in Building History, which is a part-time graduate course in architectural history, but with particular bent on helping you date buildings. It's 2 years long, and it trains people for careers in architectural conservation and restoration and heritage. And it's a nice course because it's taught in block release in 2-week modules, and you have lectures in the morning and you go and visit buildings in the afternoons. And in the second year, you write a thesis. Then we have our MPhil in Architecture and Urban Studies, which is an MPhil that covers a wide range of architectural fields. It's the preparation degree for a PhD. So you are taught in a series of lectures and seminars, and you hand in essays. It's a 1-year course, and you finish with a thesis on a topic of your choosing, directed by a supervisor. And there is another option, which is very rarely taken, which is like a miniature PhD, which is the MPhil in Architecture by thesis, This is it has no components, no teaching. It's entirely self-taught with a supervisor, and you just hand in a thesis. And we don't recommend that as a preparation for a PhD, but we do recommend that if you wanted to do a research degree on a particular topic of your own, but you don't want to take 3 years to do it, you only want to take a year, or part-time 2 years. And then we have our doctorate program, which is a standard 3-year doctorate, or can be taken part-time for over 6 years. And that is like doctorates elsewhere. You work on a particular topic with a particular supervisor. We go back to the professional degrees very briefly. There are 2 sets of professional degrees at the moment we offer. As I said, the MArch, which sits in the standard model that you need to come with a bachelor's degree. You've had a year out in practice, you apply during that year out, and you come back to us to do a 2-year Master of Architecture degree. And then after a year, after you finish that, you would then be able to take our Part 3 course, which gives professional accreditation. I didn't list that, but it's a short course that you take over a couple of weeks. The second option is our MSc apprenticeship, which takes the same length of time for overall accreditation, but here you've got a 3-year apprenticeship degree. You work throughout, and there are no fees whatsoever. The MArch course is eligible for government undergraduate loans, but here there's no loan because there is no fee. The government covers the fees and you get paid throughout, and you come for block release for 2 weeks at a time during each of the vacations over the 3-year period. And then you finish with a final qualification exam, which gets you Part 3. So this is a good way to qualify as an architect if that's what you want to do and you want to be in practice. Our MArch degree is unusual in that it is you choose your own project, and your own thesis, which you do over the whole 2 years. So it's very much self-led, and this sets it apart from Master of Architecture degrees elsewhere. And also we supply all the materials you require during that course, which is also very unusual. You will also know that when you apply to Cambridge, you have to choose a college. And this choice really doesn't matter. Just look at the colleges that are on offer and see whether you like their facilities. All the teaching is done in the department. And so really you don't, the choice of college is a choice of where you want to be associated with, if you want a historical college or a modern college, and whether they can offer bursaries or scholarships. It doesn't matter from the point of view, any other point of view. Some people like to apply for colleges where their supervisor is going to be based, but that's not an essential element. Some people don't. The college will provide tutorial support, and it'll provide you with access to accommodation. It won't necessarily accommodate you throughout your graduate course. Everybody will be interviewed. At one point, the interview will be online with 2 people. And it usually starts with a question about why you want to study the degree. If you're an MArch student, you would then talk through your portfolio. But otherwise, if you're an MPhil student or PhD student, we want to talk through your research proposal, and then we'll ask more general questions. In terms of research proposal, if for an MPhil degree or a PhD, we would expect you to come with a very clear topic you want to study, why it hasn't been done before, and that you've got the necessary skills. It's no good, for instance, wanting to study the history of medieval architecture if you don't read Latin. That won't work. And explain why it's worth doing. And you should also, when you apply, have looked carefully through the members of staff and worked out whether there is a supervisor who can supervise you. Because if you don't have anybody, we don't have anybody who can supervise you on this particular topic, we won't be able to accept you. Regardless of how brilliant you are, because we won't be able to teach you. So it's very important to go through that process, and it's usually a very good idea to email that supervisor in advance before you put in your application to get some feedback. That is the end of my slides, so I am happy to take questions.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that overview of the programs and the way that everything slots together. Natcha, if I could come to you first, actually, I could ask you just to give a brief overview of your experience of the MPhil program and then the PhD program that you've been on at Cambridge. How would you describe that particularly?
Yes, I think First of all, I'd like to point out when James talk about college and how the choice of college doesn't matter from the application point of view. When I first applied, I thought that by putting open application, it would increase my chance of getting in. And I find that that is a common misconception for many people. When I talk to many graduates, they don't know what to do with colleges because it's not every university have this system. So I think it's very important that you choose your college wisely, like you take your time picking the right college for you, because although it doesn't matter for the application point of view, it's where your social life happens. So you want it to be central enough, and you want to know people, and you want to know what you are going, where you are going to be living, and you want to do your research on that. So I think that's very important. In terms of the department, as James says, is small, but it's the small is a nice thing because you know people. You go to the department and you meet people that you're familiar with, and then it's a nice community. The MPhil course was short but fun. So it's as James says, it's a short course that prepare you for a PhD. So there's some teaching, and you get to meet people when you go to the seminars and all the tutorials that you have. So that's one way of preparing yourself, getting to know Cambridge, because it's a great way to getting to know Cambridge and prepare yourself for the PhD. Because if you come to do a PhD directly, you may not be, familiar with the supervisor or the Cambridge life in general. So it's a good way to settle in. It's a 1 year that get you settled in the program. So I think that was as an essential part of my PhD is doing the MPhil first. Other than that, there's a lot of things that you can do as a graduate student in the department. That we have a journal, and we have lots of seminars that you can organize and participate. In general, the department is very generous with what we do, and they don't really stop us from doing things. I'm not sure how far we can go. I mean, we haven't tried to be radical or unreasonable, but in general, it's a very good thing. Like you're free to do lots of things. You're free to initiate things and seminars and invite speakers. So it's a great thing.
James, is there anything you'd like to add to that, or?
No, I think so. We have an active decolonizing group at the moment, so we have all sorts of different seminar groups going on. We also have a student architecture society, ArcSoc, which organizes all sorts of events. It's mostly targeted undergraduates, but but graduates do get involved. And we have although we have a small department, that's full of people. It's not one of those empty departments that you only come to when you want to be taught and you disappear. There are places to sit and places to study.
Fantastic. Thank you both for that overview then of experiences from both sides of the coin, as it were. I'm going to turn to the live questions now that we've had coming through. James, I fear that many of them may fall on you first of all, but Nacho will bring you in where possible. We've talked already about the importance of identifying a potential supervisor, and we've had a couple of questions just wanting to clarify that. Is that important just for the MPhil and PhD, or does that advice also extend to the MArch program as well?
It does not. It necessarily extends the MArch program. The MArch program, we will look and see who might supervise you. But what we do like is a topic. So we like this is a course where we expect, unlike other MArch courses, for people to come with a place where they want to do their project and a thesis that they want to write their research on, a sort of research topic, and so you get to choose what building or thing you're going to design, but it has to also have a research element to it, because you'll spend 2 years doing a research thesis on the subject and 2 years doing this project that goes with it. In the first year, you'll be assigned studio supervisors who will help you work on a particular approach. This depends on which area your topic obviously sits in. So people who work on participatory design, or people who work on digital studios, for instance, and they will help you refine your approach. But you need to broadly frame it within the sort of things that Cambridge does. So you have to look at the kind of research our academics do, because we can't we won't be able to help you with something that's so far out of what we specialize in.
No, of course. No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Nata, actually, can I come to you in terms of asking whether there were any specific resources that you used when putting together your research proposal? How fixed an idea did you have of what you wanted to focus on, and what was that, if you don't mind sharing a bit of detail around that?
Yeah, so first for the MPhil, I had prepared my research proposal based on what I already knew from my undergraduate dissertation. So it has to be realistic in terms of you have to already know where you are going to be looking for your resources. So I had help from my undergraduate supervisor, the dissertation supervisor. So he helped me to prepare the proposal. And then, of course, you get in touch with your potential supervisor here in Cambridge, and they'll be able to guide you through, say, if your research proposal has any gaps, any flaws, or anything that you might want to address before you actually make a formal application. Then you need to have an awareness of that before you put in your formal application. And then from the MPhil to the PhD, at the time, I had a clear idea of what I would be doing, but when I started doing it, it was a different story. So in the beginning, you should know what you want to know and where you are going to find sources, and you put together a reasonable research proposal, and then you discuss with your supervisor whether that's acceptable or if that sounds like a PhD research proposal, because obviously it's a longer project. And when I first put together this proposal, I had a difficulty of imagining what a 3 years project looks like, because I only knew how to put together a proposal for an MPhil, which is a 1 year long program. So it's different. The term of depth and term of range is really different. So you need to talk to your potential supervisor and ask them what they think and whether there's anything that you can improve.
I think I would add that most people make the mistake of having far too broad a topic. In both the MPhil and in the PhD, you are attempting to become the world expert in something. So it's going to be narrow. And people tend to come with very vague things like, I want to look at housing for the poor in Brazil, and that's not specific enough. I mean, that you're never going to become the world expert on that huge topic. So the question is, what are you going to do? What is it exactly that you are studying? How are you going to study it? What's your little contribution to an enormous topic? And that's, of course, we will help you narrow that down when you arrive, but it's a good idea to start with some idea. And as Natcha says, often approaching the supervisor with this, who you know is going to be an expert in that subject, because that's why you've approached them, they will then say, well, actually, that's already been done. But if you did this, which is slightly different, would that be a good compromise? Would that still interest you?
Okay, no, thank you very much both for clarifying that. Just to return to the MArch research proposal, we have had a question around how technical this should be, or how technical a question should be identified within this, or whether it's more about raising topics of interest or a particular approach.
Okay, this varies quite radically, because in the MArch you can do all sorts of things. From, you might be interested in bamboo engineering, or you might be interested in participatory design in Pakistan. So it would depend very much on. In the MArch proposal, it's not the same as a PhD and an MPhil proposal. It's much more about defining an issue that you're interested in. So the professional degree is not. It does have a research element, but it's much less focused on research than an MPhil or a PhD. But you do need to have a very clear idea of what it is, the issue that really excites you, whether it's healthcare provision in Egypt or whatever, and what kind of project you imagine you're going to be doing. But in the first year, we'll help you hone that down and create a project that really works.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much for providing some clarity around that. Looking at supervisors, obviously many students are understandably thinking about contacting potential supervisors. Is that something that the department encourages? And when getting in touch with a potential supervisor, is it necessary to send the full research proposal or just initially a brief to help work out areas of collaboration?
I think it's no harm in sending them a full research proposal. I think the key thing that you mustn't do, and we see this a lot, is you send out an email to everybody in the department, and in fact every school in the UK, saying, I'm a huge admirer of my research. I want to do, my PhD is going to be on lunar landing sites, and you know, and it's clearly got nothing to do with 99.95% of the academics you're spamming, and that just annoys everybody. So, you really do need to look at who will be the right person. There's plenty of information on the website. You need to do some research, and that's do some research first. Find out who really is the person you'd like to work for, and then ask them a question. They might get your job is to get them interested in what you want to do. Again, this is more MPhil and PhD, and it's not necessary for the MArch. The MArch, we're just asking you to come up with a proposal. We don't necessarily need you to contact the supervisor.
Find someone specific. No, okay, thank you, understood. Moving to some of the experience that students might be applying with, and we've had a couple of questions around that. Is it necessarily an issue? I think this student is referring to those who have completed their bachelor's degree and moved into getting the work experience. Now, you mentioned that usually takes 1 year. Is it an issue if students have had 3 years before applying for the master's?
No, it's not an issue at all. And in fact, it's not an issue if they have no years. It's quite difficult to apply in the final year of your BA, but and most people don't. So no, the number of years is not relevant. In terms of accreditation, more than 1 year doesn't help you because before the MArch, so all the extra years are a bit wasted in terms of, because they count. You must have at least 1 year experience after you start a part 2 course, after you start the MArch. So there's I mean, obviously people are doing this more and more because they've built up debts and they want to pay them off. So, but you know, it can be a huge benefit because people have thought about things more. But there's no real. We certainly wouldn't hold it against you.
No.
A more mature student.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. And then just looking at the PhD program, would prospective applicants from more of a landscape architecture or professional background, would they be considered suitable candidates for the PhD program?
So the PhD is a research degree. We don't have a research by design degree in this. Mm-hmm. So it is a piece of research. As such, you need a research master's course to do it. We do not accept, we do accept people who get very, very high grades in the thesis of our own MArch, because we know that that's got a strong research element. But otherwise, we do not accept people to do a PhD who do not have an MPhil or a research degree. So you can't just come on with. So the first question for those people who have been in landscape is, you know, do they have a research degree? But in terms of what that research degree is in, we don't really care about the subject so much, because architecture is a very, very broad church. So quite often I might have a PhD student who has a first degree in history or a first degree in history of art, rather than a first degree in architecture. But they come to me because I personally happen to work in architectural history, so it makes sense for somebody to come with those background skills. So degrees in relevant subjects, if you have a master's degree in landscape and you want to work on something that's to do with landscape that's obviously relevant, then that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much for that. You mentioned history of art there, and we have had a question come in live. I appreciate this may be for students to research themselves, but I wondered if you could shed some light on, the student is asking about the MPhil in history of art and architecture, and whether you could recommend the kinds of academic interests or kinds of student that you think are better suited to, or what they might be looking for in each program.
The programs are quite similar, and here it's probably about the supervisor you want to be supervised by. So I happen to supervise on both, but the Architecture and History of Art course is really designed for art historians who want to specialize in architectural history or specialize in a branch of history of art. And it approaches architecture from that aspect, whereas our MPhil in Architecture and Urban Studies, which has a history and theory stream and a technical stream, and encourages people to work across those. It's very interdisciplinary. Will teach you a broad range of techniques. So they are different. I hope it's relatively clear from the websites how they differ in approach. I mean, but it would be perfectly possible for some. It would be unusual for somebody from an architectural background to do the one in the History of Art department. It would not be unusual for somebody with a History of Art background to do the one in the architecture department.
Yeah, thank you. And it's great to get your perspective on that. And hopefully that was useful to the student asking the question. Nacho, I have a question for you around accommodation. Now, I know obviously you can only talk about from your own experience, but we have a question here about whether most architecture master students live in college accommodation or in private housing. Was college accommodation something you were able to secure during your time here?
I'm afraid I cannot answer that question because I always live out, so I haven't lived in college accommodation before, but maybe James can help answer that.
I think this varies hugely from college to college is the honest answer. So some colleges will offer accommodation. Some colleges have very little graduate accommodation. Mostly you will not get to live in the college itself. That's very rare. And maybe if you get a scholarship in the higher years, you might be able to move back into college. So normally the undergraduates will be living in college, but colleges have graduate accommodation, and where they have graduate accommodation, which you will see on their websites, then you would go into the graduate accommodation. You always have the option to live out and rent in the town if you like. So that's up to you. You're not forced to live in college accommodation, but it can be a nice way of getting to know people. So that's one of those things that really you need to look at the college websites. It is also worth saying that some colleges do get a really large number of applicants, and because people just think that's a very grand college, it's got lots of scholarships, I'll definitely apply to that one. And so it's quite important you look at your second or third choice, because actually those colleges, it is very, very difficult to get in. They have they have almost all the applicants as a first choice. I mean, firstly, I wouldn't put them as my first choice, and I think you can probably work out from the statistics, but I would put another college. So yeah, college choice isn't easy, I admit, but if you want to live in college accommodation, then look at interrogate the websites.
Thank you. Yes, and I think you raised this point earlier, Nacho, as well, but the importance of doing your research into different colleges. So yes, some very sound advice, but not putting the most popular ones down as your first choice, certainly.
I shall be deliberately coy and not name them, because but
no, fair enough. As you say, I'm sure that it is easily inferable, I think, from information available on the websites. I missed an experience question, which I'd just briefly like to return to. The part-time program that you mentioned, James, the MST, I believe, does that accept students who are based outside the UK, or is it possible for international?
Okay. There are two MSTs, MST in Building History, or the MST Architecture Apprenticeship. The Architecture Apprenticeship does not accept non-UK students because the apprenticeship is a government-run, taxpayer-paid scheme. So you have to be a UK resident. If you've lived in the UK long enough, of course, then that would apply to you. So it may well be if you did an undergraduate degree in architecture in the UK, you may qualify. But the thing to notice about the apprenticeship is that it's slightly different from a normal architecture part 2 degree, in that your employer has to put you forward. So it's your employer that applies to the course. So you have to first go to your employer and say, I would like to be put forward for this course. And the employer then approaches us. So you're probably working for a very big firm, because the apprenticeships are really aimed at big firms. And then there is a deal that's made where the teaching is shared between the employer and the university, and quite a intricate mentoring scheme is built up, which means that you get your qualification, your architect's qualification while you're working, and we make sure you get the correct work experience with your employer to ensure that you finish your final accreditation exams. And the advantage that the government is paying the fees, but the employer has to pay a contribution towards the costs of college accommodation things. So your employer will not only have to pay your salary and release you 1 day a week to study, while paying you 5 days a week according to the government's regulations, but they will also have to take on this mentoring thing. So it's not as simple as you just applying. You need to go and talk to the directors. And really, why would they want to do this? Because they love you as an employee and they want to keep you. And if they want to keep you, then this is a very good way of doing it. And we get lots of very interesting applicants this way. It's we have applicants who've taken an apprenticeship rather than an undergraduate degree, so they've done the part 1 apprenticeship as well. So this is it's a really exciting way to qualify, but it's very professionally focused. Whereas the MArch is for somebody who wants to get out of practice again for 2 years and do some theoretical work before going back into practice for the rest of their career. The apprenticeship is very much, I want to get my qualifications and I want to learn, but I want to learn while I'm working.
Excellent, thank you. You mentioned there about the part 1 stage. We've had a live question about whether a part 1 is essential to do the MArch, or whether someone with extensive experience, this person quotes 20 years in particular, whether someone with extensive experience in art and architecture practice would be considered based on, say, their portfolio, but they don't have a part 1.
At the moment, this is unfortunately nothing to do with us. It's to do with the Architects Registration Board and the RIBA, in that we cannot accept on our part 2 course anybody who does not have a part 1. So what we would direct such a person to do is to contact the ARB, or the ARB, the Architects Registration Board, and ask them this question, and whether there is a route for them to get part 1 qualification through their experience, which then means you could take them on the course.
Okay.
And it has to be said, if they've got 20 years experience, then they may not need to do the part 2 at all. There are other routes which involve qualifying without having to go on a course at all, and just taking final examinations. So they should investigate through the Architects Registration Board. The other thing I would say is, having waited 20 years, is that the ARB and RIBA are discussing at the moment entirely changing the way that architects are trained. And if that's the case, there will not be part 1, part 2, and part 3 anymore. There will be a single master's qualification, which will, or a master's qualification and an exit degree, which will qualify the whole lot. And this will be changing in the next 5 years, I think.
Okay, incredibly interesting to know. Thank you, but certainly worth a Google.
We cannot accept on either of our professional courses somebody who hasn't got a part 1. But of course, if they can get some equivalents from the ARB, then of course we'd be very happy to consider them.
Clear. Thank you very much. We've had a couple of questions around the portfolio. You mentioned portfolio requirements earlier. So could you give a little bit more detail about what you're maybe looking for in terms of size and any general tips, really, around putting one together?
Well, I mean, anybody coming to us with a graduate portfolio is going to obviously have done a part 1 course somewhere else. So we're looking essentially for your 3rd-year portfolio. Typically, because we offer our own students are allowed to progress, and it's a relatively small course. We'll be looking for maybe 10 students from elsewhere, and we will take students who've tended to get firsts in their university or come top of their courses elsewhere, and you bring your undergraduate portfolio with you. We certainly require a high 2-1. Now, if you didn't get a first, but that's for whatever reason, then we would obviously you'd want to work on topping that portfolio up in the meantime to make it absolutely wonderful. And if you don't know by the end of part 1 what a remarkable portfolio looks like, I'd be a bit worried, because you'll have looked at your friends' portfolios and worked out which ones were fantastic. So and in terms of numbers of sheets, we ask for an electronic submission. There's no maximum size, except, well, there's maximum file size, but there's no maximum number of pages. You could do a brilliant portfolio in 6 pages, or you can do a 100-page portfolio. There's no right answer to that.
Fair enough. Thank you for covering that. Natcha, can I ask if you have any advice on putting a sort of final year portfolio together for students who are considering this or coming up to that part of their degree?
I actually no, because I didn't do my part 1, so I didn't have a portfolio. I was always doing research and history.
Oh, I see. You were more on that side of things. Oh, excellent.
Natcha's a brilliant example of somebody who's come from an art history background into the architecture PhD.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, okay. So that's, as you were saying earlier, that it is quite common for historians of art to do that. More.
So you can come with any undergraduate degree and do a PhD in architecture if the topic obviously suits somebody who could supervise you. You might be doing geography or sociology or art history or whatever, and you realize that this is, and likewise people go the other way. So if your topic sits within an area which would actually be more suited to a geography department, then you can go and do your PhD, even though you've got an undergraduate architecture degree, in a geography department. And people don't really care at the end of the day. They care about the topic and the supervisor. They don't really care which department it got a PhD in.
No, completely. I can understand that it's more about the matching of academic research areas. Absolutely. We've had a few questions around I suppose the weighting of the application process, and you may hear about this from prospective applicants already, but whether it's more of a holistic process where each element counts differently for different applicants, because they're all individuals and applying in their own context, or whether you assign particular weightings to, say, the portfolio or the research proposal part of the process.
It's completely holistic. We'll look at every piece of data we have on a candidate, and we also got the interview, and we'll try to take a combination of people who obviously have the best qualifications, but also people who we think will most benefit from being here. Sometimes this is a small department, and sometimes your research interests are maybe brilliant and really exciting, but they're actually not best suited to being here, because we don't do that kind of thing, if you see what I mean. We have research in certain areas. We don't have research in other areas. We have a limited number of academics. So you would be better off going to wherever, Zurich or Lucerne or Delft or wherever, because that's where they're the world specialists in that area.
Okay, no, fair enough. Thanks very much for clarifying that. A few more questions then. I know we're approaching the end of the session. We've got just over 5 minutes left, so do keep your questions coming. Thank you very much for those that have been submitted so far. For a student who's applying to the MArch, is applying to focus on a very theoretical topic or okay? The student says that they know that the topic is not strongly related to the specificities of a particular physical site, but is it okay to state that the focus of their project would be quite theoretical?
It can be, but in the MArch they need to design something. because there has to be a portfolio element that will satisfy the Part 2 requirements of the visiting boards of the Royal Institute of British Architects. So it isn't an entirely written piece of documentation. You have to make something, you have to design something. So my question would immediately be, I mean, you might not have a site, but that's fine. It might be a siteless building or thing, but it should have an element of design, and a recognizable element of design. I mean, it's we're talking very abstractly here because I've no idea exactly what the question is, but I would say that you're going to spend 2 years producing a design portfolio that's going to impress the professional bodies. If you want to do a research degree in architectural theory and philosophy, just do the MPhil. Yeah, I mean, let's explore that area, but that won't get you professional accreditation. So my question for such a student would be, what is your design project?
Excellent. Okay, well, hopefully, thank you. The student.
It might be a universally applicable building, which is or building type, which are very interesting, and that's fine.
Great, something definitely for those watching to think about, and thank you to the student who asked that. Hopefully you've given some food for thought there. Just a few more questions then. Can I apply to, or can I get in touch with a supervisor who is currently on sabbatical?
You can. I mean, that's fine. They'll hopefully reply. What's more awkward, of course, is for a master's course wanting to work under a supervisor who's about to go on sabbatical, because although PhD students are supervised throughout sabbaticals, then MPhils are not. So that's worth knowing. I mean, you contact somebody and say, they might say, I'm terribly sorry, I'd love to supervise you, do my topic, but I'm on sabbatical next year. But that you'd be unlucky for that to happen, and they would normally suggest somebody else.
Sure, thank you. Could you give an idea of what the balance is between Cambridge graduates and non-Cambridge graduates on the MArch programme?
At the moment, well, it's probably about to change, because this is the first year we're offering Cambridge students who get over 65% in their undergraduate degrees an automatic place. That doesn't mean they'll take it up, but this is the first time we've ever done that. Up until this point, there were out of a cohort of 20 to 25, approximately 20 students were from outside Cambridge, but we obviously expect that to change quite markedly at this point, probably about 50-50, I would imagine.
Sure. All right, thanks very much. And then the final question, as we're coming towards the end of the session, is there a way for students to get in contact afterwards if they have queries about the application process or the programme? Where would you encourage students to look for contact details?
The graduate administrator in the architecture department. So if the email on the website, and we will, and if they can't answer the question, they'll fire it off to somebody who can.
Brilliant, thank you. And Nacha, last question to you. If you had one piece of advice for someone who was perhaps looking to apply to either the MPhil or PhD programme in the areas that you've studied, what would you advise prospective applicants to do?
Well, I would say do your research. I mean, get to know the supervisor, get to know what you are getting into, be prepared. Because sometimes you don't hear until the last minute that you have an interview, and then you have an interview and you're not prepared. So just do your research and be prepared, and yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you both very much for your time this afternoon. I really appreciate it. We had quite a barrage of questions there, so we're pleased with the number we've worked through. So thank you very much for answering all of those. Just a quick point that this session has been recorded, so it will be available to all of you watching until the end of the virtual Postgraduate Open Days on the 13th of November, so you can come back and review any of the questions we've covered at your leisure. Thanks very much for attending. We hope we found it useful and that you've enjoyed it, and please do have a look at all the other sessions we're offering as part of the Open Days. There are sessions coming up later this week on the application process, on funding, and on college life as well, with some joint college sessions, so do keep an eye out for those. Otherwise, thank you very much, take care, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.